Greetings from Innerville, Madam Vinita Bali. I welcome you to our 18th International Innerville First Virtual Convention. My dear friends, change is inevitable. Change is nature's law. The world is undergoing great changes. People are changing, infrastructures are changing, and problems are changing. Expectations are rising, and material values are increasing. But sensitivity of the heart is dying. Against this scenario, we need to re-establish our values. Innerville is a 97-year-old organization. The theme this year is Lead the Change. And Madam Vinita, we want to hear your views about change in an organization. Friends, this is an interactive session. I welcome the two eminent past international Innerville presidents, Catherine Refabert and Dr. Kapila Gupta, who would be interacting with you, Madam Vinita. The floor is yours now, Catherine and Kapila.
Thank you, President Bina, for giving me an opportunity to interact with such a global iconic personality, Vinita Bali. My question is on behalf of all the Innerville members in 104 countries, Vinita Bali ji, and it's regarding the service activities. Which activity should we take which is relevant to the problems of women and children facing in current scenario of changing economical, social, and political environment?
Thank you very much, Dr. Gupta, for that very profound question, actually. And before I begin, my thanks to all of you and to all the members of Innerville International for doing the work that you do and the way that you do this work. I think it's very important that you are connected to people at the grassroots level, wherever or in whichever country you are doing this work. And you raised a very, very significant question, which really has to do with women. And unfortunately, when you look at the world around us, whenever there is a situation of hardship, whenever there is a situation where people get dislocated, whenever there is a situation like the one the current pandemic has created in the entire world, unfortunately, the people who are at the worst end of this are women and children. We've seen reports from the United Nations, from the World Bank, etc., that over the estimates are range anywhere between 100 to 150 million people will go back into poverty. There is lack of food, there is lack of nourishment, there is increase in domestic violence, there is abuse of women and children. So I wish I could start on a happy note, but since you asked the question in terms of what are the challenges for women and children, I think those are the challenges. How do we protect, how do we make sure that the women who constitute almost half the population of this world get, equity and fairness and understanding? And right now, it just seems to be a very unequal world. And that is why I think the work that the Innerville Club is doing in over, in many hundreds of countries that you are present in, I think 200 or something, if I remember correctly what Bina said to me or thereabouts. I think the work, therefore, that you're doing in each of those countries becomes very significant and very important, especially at a time like this. So what is it that we can do? I think, first of all, given the resources that all of you have, By that, I don't mean only your financial resources, but I mean your resources of your position in society. You know, all the people who are giving of their time on a voluntary basis for the work that Inner Wheel is doing are doing a tremendous job in terms of increasing the awareness of these social problems in the middle of our societies. And it doesn't matter, you know, whether you live in urban, let's say, take the case of India, whether you live in urban India or rural India. And it is the same with countries around the world. I mean, I have lived and worked in Africa, I have lived and worked in Latin America, in Europe, as well as the US. And I can tell you that that socio-economic divide exists in every country on this planet. And I think what that socio-economic divide causes is so much of inequality, so much of inequity. And as we said earlier, whether it is people who are dislocated, you know, currently the estimate is that there are over 70 million people who are dislocated from their homes because of one reason or another. It could be a civil war in your country, it could be other reasons. And again, the women and children get the worst of it. So I think one of the things, since your topic is about leading the change, I think a big challenge that we have is how do we change the narrative around women? And how do we change the narrative around women and children so that the decision makers who, you know, if truth be told, most of the decision makers happen to be men because they are the ones who are in positions of power. The question, therefore, or the challenge I would put before each of you is how can you take your sphere of influence, your social status, your standing in the community, etc., and try and influence the decisions that are made for the welfare of women and their children. How do we, you know, the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, talk about empowerment of women, talk about equality, talk about many other things from food to nutrition to job creation, etc. And those goals have to be achieved by 2030. Well, many countries in the world are nowhere close to achieving those goals. And a lot of those goals really have to do with the social well being of women. So I think there is a lot of work for organizations like yourselves, but I think that work has to be focused, that work has to be long term because these changes don't happen overnight. You know, these are things that you have to work on for a long period of time before you begin to see the shifts. So I've given a rather long answer to your very specific question, but I hope I've answered it. And if there is anything else that you would like me to elaborate on, I'll be happy to do so.
What infrastructure changes do you envisage for our organization to acquire to remain relevant to the available technology?
You know, another very, very interesting question, Catherine. My view on technology is that, you know, technology is not an end in itself, but technology is an enabler to that end. And I think what technology has done for us is, on the one hand, it has made communication very, very accessible. You know, if you have access to a smartphone, you can have access to communication or information or news from anywhere in the world. But I think having the hardware of technology is one thing. How technology is used and how technology is used for good versus, just creating rumors is not a good use of technology. If technology is used as it currently has during the pandemic to actually teach people who are out of school their school lessons, if technology is used to help the farmers with giving them tips on what they should be doing to grow their crops, if technology is used to inform women about what they need to know about opening bank accounts and how to operate those bank accounts. It's a great use of technology. So I think the way I would like to think about it is that technology in and of itself is neither good nor bad. It's what we do with technology. It is how we use technology. It is how we access technology. It is how we democratize information and understanding, um, where, you know, those are the areas where technology really begins to benefit people. And I think there is a lot that can be done with technology in the work that you do. For example, if there is any communication around a program or an incentive that women can be eligible for or entitled to, then using technology that those women use, which essentially happens to be smartphones, is actually a very, very good way of communicating with them. On the other hand, there are, you use the word infrastructure. So infrastructure is part technology, but infrastructure is also a lot more. And if I were to think of infrastructure, it is, how are we reaching the people we are serving, the people who are dependent on us and our organization. Part of it is technology, part of it is how do we actually get to them? Are there roads that are available to take us to those, to those villages or to those farms or wherever it is? Is there infrastructure available to the people with whom we work and the people who we are serving that we should be thinking about? So I think infrastructure has many, many ramifications. But I think the way to think about infrastructure is that if we were to put some hardware and software in place, does that enable us to do what we are doing more efficiently? Does it enable us to do what we are doing more effectively? And does it enable us to keep in touch with the communities and the societies and the populations we are working with and serving?
So my another question to you is, as President Bina says, lead the change, and you're also gone through a lot of changes in your global iconic personality to be recognized today in this world. Could you tell us, when we are talking of the change, is it the women need to first change within themselves before they think of change in their organization as well as the community around them?
You know, uh, it's a question with many dimensions to it. I think, as Gandhi ji put it very effectively when he said,
Exactly.
"Be the change you want to see in the world."
Absolutely.
So we can all talk about change, but if you don't see that in my behavior, I lose credibility, and nobody wants to listen to someone who only talks but doesn't walk the talk, as it were.
Right.
And I think we talk a lot about change, but essentially, it is the nature of the human being to resist change. We are very comfortable with the way we are. There are some changes we adapt to very quickly. So, for example, we've been talking a lot about smartphones, but yes, the moment smartphones came, everybody knows how to do this, that, whatever. We know how to look for information, send photographs, etc. So, some change that makes my life either more interesting or makes my life easy or makes my connections better, I think people adapt to that change. But those are not the kind of changes we are talking about. We are talking about changing mindsets. We are talking about changing perspective. We are talking about changing thinking. We are talking about changing behavior. We're not talking about, use of technology or something like that and calling it change. I think the serious question that all of us have to ask ourselves is that we live at a time where we have answers to most of the world's problems. We know that climate change is something that has to be tackled. We know that we shouldn't be going around cutting trees because deforestation is not a good thing for our planet. We know so many things. and yet we behave in ways which are exactly the opposite. We talk about the fact that enshrined in the constitutions of every country is equality between men and women, and yet it is a very unequal world for women. So I think when we talk about change, we have to start with ourselves. I can't expect to change anybody if I am not willing to change. So, yes, back to your question, change has to start with a realization that change is important. Change has to start with a conviction that without that change, the circumstance or the situation around us will not change. Change has to start with the understanding that it will take a long time. Change is not something that you decide and it happens. You have to, there are so many, we are so conditioned in many ways about the way we think. Our minds have been colonized because as we are growing up, we are told that this is what you can do and this is what can't do. Girls can do this, but boys can't do this. Or, let your brother do this, but you can't do this as a girl. So if we have to change those mindsets, not just within ourselves, we've been talking a lot about what women need to do. I think a very, very important point that I would like to leave with you is to say that, unless the other half of the world changes, we can do all the change, but nothing significant will happen.
Right.
So it is not just women talking to other women, it is women engaging with men in this conversation. The world is not going to change just because we say it should change. The world is going to change when we engage in conversations with people who think differently from us. Those people could be our colleagues at work, those could be our fathers, those could be our spouses, those could be our sons, those could be our daughters, those could be anybody. So I think what we really have to understand is that change is easy to talk about, but hard to accomplish because it involves conviction, it involves tenacity, it involves hard work, and most importantly, it involves the ability to engage with people who think differently from you, whose beliefs are different from yours, whose worldview is very, very different. So if the condition of humanity is going to change, if the condition of this world is going to change, then humanity must include women and children who oftentimes get marginalized in these conversations. And therefore, it is so important not just to reach out to the women, but also to their families. Because, if men could participate in this change, and if all of us could believe that this planet and everything that it has given us is everybody's to share. It's not meant for the rich. It's not meant for people with a fair skin. It's not meant for people with a dark skin. It is not meant for people with certain religious beliefs, etc. Then and only then will we create the big shift and the big change that we are talking about. What is true of bringing about change in the world is also true of organizations. Whether you talk about an academic institution, a business, an organization like yourself, we are all very comfortable working the way we have worked in the past because everybody knows what to do. But unless we question that, we can only change a result if we change the process. And we can only change the process if we have the courage to question what we are doing, the courage to change what is not working, and also the courage to stay with what is working. So change is a process, change is a mindset, change is a conviction, and it has to be participative. It cannot be thrust down anybody.
Our international president, Bina Vyas, has given us a relevant theme this year, Lead the Change. As we are approaching the 100th year of our organization, How do you think our women members should promote and lead to the change for a better and bolder organization?
Thank you, Catherine. Some of it we have already discussed. So, one big point of change that I see is you talked about better and bolder change. Can Inner Wheel start engaging with men and not just women? I think that will be a very big, bold move, which says that we are all part of this humanity. So, why should we only talk to 50% of that humanity and pretend as though the remaining 50% doesn't exist? So, I think those, to my mind, would be the big, bold moves, which is to say, if our if our ethos is service, if our ethos is to make this world a better place, then we have to engage with everybody who is in this world and not selectively. Because, when we are selecting to interact with women, we are selecting, a certain gender interaction, and we are excluding a very large part of the gender. So I would say, perhaps your upcoming conference is a very good time really to reflect on what Inner Wheel has done over this long period of existence that you have had. And then to say, let's be very candid about what has worked and what hasn't worked as well as it should have. And can we also say, going forward, what will be our theory of change that we want to bring about in the world? Because all of you start with a desire to improve something in the area in which you're working. It could be access to education, it could be access to jobs, it could be anything else. So, if you were to say, in order to do this, and in order to do this effectively, and for that to be sustainable, who are all the stakeholders that are part of this? We will then realize that whilst women are important stakeholders, men are equally important stakeholders, because if they encourage you, then things will go doubly fast. And if they are not with you, they will slow things down, it will become an obstacle. And therefore, for the effort that you are expending, your results will be inadequate. So I think one of the facets of change really is to say, how can change be inclusive? It'll be harder work. It'll take more time. But when it happens, I think it will be like magic and it will be there to stay.
Before we hand over mic back to President Bina, my last question to you, Vinita, which has been haunting me for quite some years since I joined Inner Wheel. We have come a long way of 97 years of our service to community and friendship. What should you be advising us to all the Inner Wheel members worldwide? What should we adopt to become an household name promoting community service and the friendship among women?
So, what you're saying is, for 97 years in 104
Yeah,
countries, you've done very good work, and it
absolutely.
remains the world's best kept secret.
Yep.
So, there are a few things. One is, it depends on which audience you're talking about. If you look at it at a country level, at least in the areas where you're working, I'm sure there is recognition not just for your name, but also your work. There isn't a magic bullet to this. Organizations have existed for years, and organizations such as yours need to build their name and fame on the basis of the work that you're doing. So at a local level, can people write about the work that you're doing? Can you actually, in this world of social connectivity, is there a Facebook page that Inner Wheel has? Are members of Inner Wheel actually telling the world, either through Facebook or through Instagram or through tweeting, the fabulous work that you're doing? Can you get some of the people who have benefited from your work to tell real stories about what Inner Wheel does. I looked at your website, and it's okay, but I think that website can be used to be made far more dynamic in terms of telling the stories of Inner Wheel. There are organizations where people follow the Facebook page. People like to know about real things and real changes that you have made. Is there something that can be done with media, for example? I can talk about India. There are TV channels that
Yeah.
collaborate with organizations, to raise funds, to do something. In fact, I was associated with something last Sunday, which was about collecting money to give loans, education loans to families of children who are being pulled out of school because the parents don't have a job. So, is there something where, with the people who support you, organizations who support you, they could talk about it, where you collaborate with a media house to tell the story or the stories of the lives that you have changed as a result of this? I'm sure there are many of you who are very well connected. I would go to somebody like, BBC or CNN and say, you know, we'd like for you to cover, 10 stories from 10 different countries around the world on the difference that Inner Wheel has made. So it could be little things, it could be stories in the traditional media, but it could also be where you are not relying on traditional media and you are using the resources that you have. I think if I remember correctly, Bina, you had said there are about 100,000 volunteers. Now,
Yeah.
if 100,000 volunteers were to have a strategy on what to do with social media, which is really to tell the story of Inner Wheel to the world, not to the country in which I'm living, but to the world, then slowly over a period of time, you come into the public domain. People begin to talk about you. People begin to talk about the work that you're doing. So these things are built up over a long period of time in a manner which is very sustainable and with a very clear cut strategy, which is really to say, we want people to think of Inner Wheel when they think of organizations that help humanity, that help women, that make this world a better place.
Thank you, past International Inner Wheel presidents, Catherine and Kapila, for this wonderful interactive session. Friends, change we must, because we have to continue to be the change makers in the world of Inner Wheel. Thank you, Madam Vinita, for your views on change and for guiding us to be courageous and bold enough to accelerate our efforts in the change process. Publicizing our work in our communities through various media is the best way to make our name and fame. Thank you, Vinita, for expressing your views with all the Inner Wheel members in the world.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity and all
Thank
the best for your conference. Thank you.